everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Bill Savings in a Clean Energy Future webinar. This is Liz Stanton from Synapse Energy Economics, and also calling in remotely, we have Pat Knight from Synapse. And we're going to be presenting on our recent policy brief and report about Clean Energy Future and how that relates to the Clean Power Plan. I'm going to start out with some logistics just quickly. We're recording this webinar, and we're going to send that out to everyone that registered and all the attendees. It'll get posted up on the website as well. Everyone has been muted, and that's just to help with so many people on the call, making things a little easier for the presenters. If you have a question, send it to webinar@synapse-energy.com. We're looking at that as they come in while we're still in the webinar here, and we'll try to answer questions. If it needs clarification, or we may wait till the end of our presentation and then answer them then. You have a question or a comment, a concern about the mechanics, a technical issue about the webinar, then use the chat feature of WebEx, and that'll come through to a slightly different place. So we're at synapse-energy.com for your questions about content, and the chat feature in WebEx for any technical issues. Thanks. So I'm sure that a lot of you have joined us for webinars before or know us from other work. I welcome and encourage you to go to our website and take a look at our publications and projects there to see what we're working on. We're a consulting agency that is located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and our work is focused on electric sector and other energy issues as they relate to environmental policy. So this presentation is about a policy brief that we released last week. And if you've seen that, then you'll recognize these images or something very close to them. We're going to be going through how we came to these results, what the modeling was that went into it, what our assumptions were, and a little bit more detail about the specific results as well. If you haven't seen the brief and the report that goes along with it, then you can get to that right from the home page of our website. You can see down the bottom here, hopefully everybody can see that. You can see our web address down here, and there's a link to it from that home page. Here's the agenda for our talk this afternoon. We'll talk about what is the clean energy future, looking into how we design that scenario, how do we model that scenario, looking at the tools we use for that, the different models. What is the clean energy future like? If we're in that future, what we expect to see in terms of generation, emissions. Does Clean Energy Future comply with the proposed Clean Power Plan? We'll look at our state-by-state results. Does Energy Future lower electric bills? And we'll discuss our findings for modeling about savings to state electric systems and savings on household bills. So let's start here. What is the Clean Energy Future? The Clean Energy Future is a scenario designed by Synapse of a possible future for our electric system here in the United States. I'll say that what we're modeling is the 48 lower United States. So we're not looking at Hawaii or Alaska in this modeling project. And what we do is, for the Clean Energy Future, we wanted to design an idea of the electric system in the future that was what we're calling no regrets in terms of cost. So the cost would actually be lower than a reference scenario. And the reference scenario is what our future would look like if we just kept on sort of doing the things that we're doing now, and there weren't any new policies that had to be complied with. There was no Clean Power Plan. We just kept on making investments that we've been making over the past, say, 5 years, and just keep on making those into the future. So our clean energy future, the basic idea of how to design that and what we were going for is that it would actually be less expensive than that reference scenario. We chose our assumptions based on current day examples where you could see sort of a case study of this being a reasonable amount of a particular resource, something that worked, and also from good studies that we've seen out that are helpful and detailed and back up their findings, and we felt comfortable using here. And we took that information and put it together as a clean energy future. Obviously, you could have designed this in many other ways, but this is the one that we put together from that motivation. And you'll find these more detailed assumptions in our report with more discussion about them. If you have specific questions about specific assumptions, I can address them during the Q&A period. Here. So the goal was to ask and answer the question, we have a no-regret scenario going into the future, something that has lower emissions than we have today, is better for the environment, but at the same time doesn't cost more than that reference case. The kind of information that we were looking at to make choices about what investments to take on going forward. Looking at the top, you can see how different resources going out into the future. Some of them have prices that are increasing over time. Some of them have prices that are falling. Our choice was to add more of those renewables that have prices that are falling over time. We've seen a lot of good evidence that many different analysts and research groups expect that to be the case as we move into the future. So we're adding a lot of renewables into clean energy future. We're also adding a lot of efficiency measures. And we're adding those measures, and then the result of that being that a lot of coal retired. In that way, we don't have to pay environmental retrofits that federal regulations other than the Clean Power Plan now require of coal. All of those cost savings are what helps to make this a no-regret scenario. So given those basic ideas that we're going to do a lot of renewables, we're going to do a lot of energy efficiency, we'll let the coal retire so we don't have to rebuild those plants to be cleaner, we can just let them go. How do we model that? Well, we have a whole sort of package, a suite of models that we use here at Synapse that all talk to one another, and I'll go through those a little bit. The basic idea, like I said, is that we're modeling two futures using this suite of models. One reference future that's business as usual, no new policies. The other is the clean energy future that I've been talking about, extensive investments in energy efficiency and renewables. And then when we talk about savings, you understand that as being the difference between those two scenarios. So what do we get in the clean energy future different from the reference case? We're comparing to the reference case in the same year. And a lot of what we're presenting here is looking at it in 2030. You'll see some other years as well, but that's the end date for the proposed Clean Power Plan, and so we're focusing on that as one of our markers to see what's going on in that year. Here's a schematic with a lot of information on it. I'm not going to go through all of this. That's about what we call our Synapse Clean Power Plan Toolkit. This is what we use to do our Clean Power Plan modeling, and it does involve a lot of different bits and pieces. Some are models that we've designed here at Synapse, like Cavity model and CP3T, both of which are publicly available. You can find them up on our website. Cavity helps you figure out what the costs of coal generation for specific units will be in the future, given existing environmental regulations and what those units will have to invest in terms of environmental retrofits in order to be compliant with those regulations. CP3T is our Clean Power Plan tool that lets us model generation from different resources in each state and flow that through to Clean Power Plan compliance to see is the state in compliance or not, what would have to change to get into compliance. Feed into that for the work that you're seeing here presented in this webinar and the brief and report. We're using NREL's READS model. It's a model that gets into very specific electric sector description of the build-out of technologies over time. We've made some adaptations to that model to have it be able to give us the resolution of results that we're looking for. And we've also built an additional model called Report that pulls results out of it and helps us to feed it into CP3T. So those are the basics. We use all of these different tools. Also, we use an energy efficiency savings tool that Synapse staff built for EPA, and you'll find up with the Clean Power Plan information on the EPA website. Take all of these pieces and we put into it as an input our assumptions about the future scenarios, the reference case, the clean energy future case. They go through these models with lots and lots of very detailed information about specific units and specific technologies, and in the end, we're able to figure out whether states are compliant with the Clean Power Plan, what the cost of compliance would be, bill impacts to states. And on this particular project, we're not doing the part here that you see that's about in-plan and jobs and GDP. That's something that we've done in other projects, however. That's the general idea here. We're poised to update everything in here that will need updating when the final rule is released and be able to use this suite of tools for additional analysis, to update the analysis that you see in our current brief, and also to do analytical work for clients that are reaching out to us that have the state-specific needs. So that's how we modeled it. What is the clean energy future like? Here's some images to give you an idea of these. Some of these are in the report. I think a couple of them are not. This is looking at generation broken down by resource type. Going out, starting in 2012, that's our base year, same as in the Clean Power Plan, so we use that same base year. And then you see 2020, 2025, and 2030. In the three future years, there are two choices. One is the reference case, one is the clean energy future. One thing we're asked about in here is that if this is generation, it looks like the clean energy future generation is larger than the reference case generation, but actually energy efficiency is stacked on top of the generation here. So the need or demand for electricity would be larger in the clean energy future, but a lot of that would be met through efficiency. And the reason that the demand would be larger is that we're assuming in our clean energy future a great integration with the transportation sector. So more electric vehicles, and having those electric vehicles be, at least for a share of them, having their storage capabilities be integrated with grid storage. So that's why you see that what we call reconstituted demand, the generation plus the efficiency being a little larger than it is in the reference case. So look through here, you can see less coal and less natural gas in the clean energy future than in the reference case. You see renewables growing in each of the time periods, and you see efficiency growing in each of the time periods. This next graph shows us changes in carbon dioxide emissions. Again, it's set up the same way. We start with 2012 as a base year. Then you can see 2020, 2025, 2030. You see the two futures, the reference case future and the clean energy future, next to one another, and you can see if you just look at the reference, you could see in that reference business as usual case, emissions growing slowly over time, or just electric sector emissions, or electric sector, in the case of Clean Energy Future, with some of that extra, some of the extra transportation, EV, electric vehicle generation emissions brought in as well. For the Clean Energy Future, what you see is the carbon dioxide emissions dropping over time, and the statistic that's pulled out on here is that in 2030, the CO2 emissions are 55% lower in the Clean Energy Future than they are in the reference case. It's a difference, a big drop. Does Clean Energy Future comply with the proposed Clean Power Plan? So here are some results for the lower 48 states as a whole. And you'll see the 2012 emissions once again. Here we're looking at the Clean Power Plan versus the Clean Energy Future. Those are the two things that are being compared in the paired columns here. So the Clean Power Plan, of course, there are lots and lots of different ways, maybe an infinite number of ways that Clean Power Plan could be implemented. This is looking at the implementation that's in the proposed rule filing as being the emission amount there. There's a 2020 to 2029 glide period, an interim period, where states in the proposed rule would have to comply getting their emissions on average through that period to be equal or less than a certain amount. And then in 2030, that's the sort of final marker for Clean Power Plan. Clean Power Plan, as I'm sure that a lot of the folks on the phone call have a deep understanding of Clean Power Plan now, the proposed rule. The rule is proposed in terms of emissions rates, with discussion in the rule as proposed about use instead a mass-based compliance, where states would comply on a total emissions rather than on an emissions rate. And then that was followed up with additional release from the EPA with more specific about how that mass-based compliance work and potential ways of setting the targets for each state. We're using the mass-based system here, so what you see in our modeling here is all mass-based. CP3T, our Clean Power Plan modeling tool, does both. It does both the rate and the mass, but for simplicity, we're just looking at mass here. You can see that for the nation as a whole, or at least for the lower 48 here, that our CO2 emissions are 34% lower than the requirement. We're actually over-complying. And that isn't surprising when you think of this from the way that we designed the Clean Energy Future, that we weren't trying necessarily to meet the compliance goals of the Clean Power Plan. And like I said, you could comply with the Clean Power Plan in an infinite number of ways. What we're trying to do is create a no-regret scenario that reduced emissions. And the scenario that we put together that lowered costs and had built things for consumers, it so happens that it not only complies with Clean Power Plan, but it over-complies. This chart shows state-specific results, and let's look at the first state here. They're lined up here by their 2005 emissions. And I know it can be a little confusing when people are talking about Clean Power Plan because they go back and forth 2005 and 2012 as the base here. EA in its Clean Power Plan ruling is using 2012 as a base here, but it also makes comparisons to 2005 emissions, so it does get a little confusing. Here we're looking at emissions against the 2005 year, that's the gray. So were each of these states' electric sector emissions in 2005? The little black bar shows the 2030 emissions cap for the Clean Power Plan. That's the mass-based target. So you can see for Texas, that's a bit lower than 2005. And then the yellow shows what that state, the emissions that that state would have in 2030 under our clean energy future. So still lower. And that's the case for most of the states here. There's a little bit of variation in the order of those three bars. See also that there are four states, and two of them easily. The other two are a little bit invisible at this scale, but four states on here that have a little bit of red. And that means that by our applying the clean energy future, where we weren't particularly trying to get any of the states to be compliant, we were just looking for a no-regret scenario, that four of the states were not compliant with the Clean Power Plan without trading. Our reading of the proposed rule is that, and other information released by EPA, is that trading is very likely to be one aspect of Clean Power Plan compliance. So we don't look at these four states as not complying, but as complying with trading, that these are four states that would require some trading to comply. And there may be states that that's the best way for them to comply, is that if their neighbors can do certain things more cheaply than they can, then it may make economic sense for those states to go a little bit slower with their rollout of renewables or efficiency and rely on purchases of credits of one kind or another. They might be renewable energy REC credits, or it might be some other kind of certificate that with which we buy and sell compliance with the Clean Power Plan, or we're buying and selling CO2 rights. What is in the clean energy future, we see four states that are having the need to trade with other states to comply. The audience, I think, from looking over the registrants, is going to be a mix of technical and non-technical folks out there. So if you're not feeling very technical today, you might want to stop listening to me for a couple minutes. And if you are feeling technical, then I will show you this very elegant edition of our modeling results by our own Pat Knight, who's one of the authors of the report, where the dots on here are states. This is an image for 2030. The dots are states. And if your dot is above and to the left of the diagonal line, then that means that you are more than complying with the Clean Power Plan. If you're exactly on the line, you're perfectly complying with the Clean Power Plan. And if you're to the right and below the diagonal line, then you would need something else. You would need trading in order to comply. So this image, there's one like this in the report for 2030 and another one that gives that interim 2020 to 2029 period, and really puts a lot of information together that you can see of what the range is of states and how close they are to complying exactly, how close they are to being zero emissions. So it's an interesting image. It's an interesting image that you can spend some time looking offline. For trading, I've just been talking that a little bit. Most states overcomply. There are four that need trading to comply. When you add all that up, there'll be, so in the clean energy future, the need for within those four states is very small. It's just a small amount of credits or additional compliance credit that we would need. In comparison to the amount of available credit, the extra over and above compliance that would be going on in 2030, that available extra credit really swamps out the credit that's needed. Part of the assumption here is that because of that dynamic, where there's so much more supply for these certificates than there is demand, that it would push the price down very low. And so we're assuming sort of a marginal price of just a dollar credit or a dollar a ton for compliance credits. does Clean Energy Future lower electric bills? So we present our results about costs in two ways. One is looking at costs in terms of the state as a whole. And here's an image that's like this. We've done an earlier fact sheet that focused on these results, just results of cost for states as a whole. And you can see here costs are lower in the Clean Energy Future than they are in the reference case. Save $40 billion in 2030. We also, for this latest fact sheet released last week, did a more complicated analysis that's a bills analysis, where we're figuring out the electric rate in each state. We're figuring out for residential customers how much energy efficiency they're using, how much energy then, after that energy efficiency, what's their actual usage of electricity, what it means for their bills, for people that participate in energy efficiency programs, for people that don't participate in energy programs. That's what you see here. I'll run this quickly, and then I want to explain a couple of things that are different about calculating costs for states and calculating bills. Here you can see that in our modeling, this is just U.S. nationwide, and average is what I'm showing here. In 2012, had an average residential bill, $105. 2030, in our reference case, we don't have people doing additional energy efficiency measures, so everybody is a non-participant. Nobody's participating in energy efficiency measures, and the bills are $126. In the Clean Energy Future, the two green boxes, if you're not participating, in energy efficiency programs, the bill goes up to $130. If you are participating in energy efficiency programs, then the bill goes down to $91. And one of the takeaways from this is the importance of assuring that as wide a set of consumers are participating in energy efficiency as possible. And the more that's widened, then the greater the advantage there are to low-income households, to other households that may have less likelihood today of participating in energy efficiency programs. So back over here for a second. When we're calculating bills, there's a couple things that I know people often want to know about this. One is that we are calculating the stranded assets or all of the assets, even if they get retired, both in the reference case and the Clean Energy Future case. It's all in there. The other is that important technical differences when you are estimating costs for the state as a whole versus trying to do a bill analysis is the treatment of energy efficiency. Whereas for most of our other kinds of electric resources is generating resources as well as transmission and things like that, we, in doing bills analysis, assume that these are going to be financed. And so the way they get passed through to ratepayers is financed and stretched out so that you're paying for them little by little over the course of the lifetime of that technology. And maybe this will change in the future, but today there isn't a whole lot of financing of energy efficiency going on, and so programs are often paid for in the year when they occur. And so do calculate that in. We do that calculation when we do the bills, whereas with costs, energy efficiency, and all of generation, those are all spread out. They're levelized over time as if they were financed, but when we do the bills, we want a good representation of actual impacts on ratepayers that we can, and so we take those energy efficiency investments and we put them in the first year, so the first year in which each of those investments occurs. And it makes the pattern of those payments a little different over time than if you just spread them out. Here's the image showing the for each state, the bill savings. So this is the difference in the monthly residential bill from the reference scenario to the Clean Energy Future scenario. there are savings for every state in 2030. You'll note that this figure, the states are not in the same order as the emissions figure. We've got them in order here by the bill savings. And there's a big difference among states, but all of the states came out as saving money in comparison to a reference case. Are the bill savings for participants. For non-participants by state, it varies a lot more. For some states, non-participants save money too. For other states, it's going to cost non-participants a little bit more in the Clean Energy Future than it would in the reference case. And again, balance between the two depends very strongly on how widely spread efficiency programs are. So let me go through a couple of informational slides here, and then I'm going to start taking a look at questions that have been coming in. So some important links for your reference. You can get to these from our page and from our website as well. Our first brief in this series, Lower Cost, Lower Emissions, it had a technical background paper that went along with it, giving some details about Clean Energy Future. Brief that came out last week, Clean Power Means Lower Bills for Consumers, had an accompanying report with more detail to it. And I just wanted to let everybody know that we are planning a webinar series after the release of the final rule. I know that we're expecting the final rule to come out between now and the end of the summer. Once it does, then we'll release the specific dates for these webinars, and we may add a few webinars to this as well, but these are the ones we have planned so far. We'll be doing a cut of information about the final Clean Power Plan. We're planning that 2 days after the rule comes out. We'll do a more detailed treatment with a lot of very specific information about 2 weeks after the rule comes out. As soon as the rule comes out, we're going to be working hard to update our power plan model, our CP3T model, and we will be doing a webinar and releasing the new version of that model, hopefully about 4 weeks after the rule comes out. And then we're planning what's brief number 3. It's an update to the brief number 2 that was released last week. So the same idea, figuring out emissions, compliance, bill impacts by state, doing that for the final rule. And we're estimating that it'll be about 6 weeks after the final rule comes out. So we'll be letting everyone know when we have dates for these webinars, and we're happy to hear from you if there are other things that we should be presenting about or things that you'd like to be getting more information about. We'd love to hear that feedback. So here, I'm going to start looking at questions and answering questions for people. So if you have them, remember that we're sending questions to webinar@synapse-energy.com. And if you have technical problems, then you probably already chatted with us using the chat function in WebEx. Let us know that. So let me start looking at a few questions here, and also my co-author Pat Knight is on the phone, and I'm sure he'll be helping out with that. So give me a second here.
Pat Knight, I'll just answer one of the first questions I've seen. We got a question that came in about total cost components and whether or not total costs include retrofits or also costs associated with new meant to meet reliability requirements and reserve targets. So the first thing I want to say that in both our reference case and our Clean Energy Future reserve margin requirements are met. And then in addition, what we're presenting here in terms of total costs, in everything that we've discussed, like dollar and cost numbers, talking about the difference between what's built in one scenario versus the other. So that that includes both the retrofit costs and avoided costs of building traditional generation as well.
Thanks, Pat. Do you see that there's a question about price trends? Are you seeing that question? I was thinking maybe you'd answer that. No, he's not seeing the question. Okay, we're going to send you that question so you can see it, and I'll answer a different question in the meantime. Yeah. We've had questions about the rationale for choosing different amounts of resources that we used. So why, for example, did we choose the particular amount of renewables? The way that we set that up in the READS model was to kind of imagine a national RPS. And so that's the basic idea there, where 70% of generation would come from renewables by 2040. And we, in making choices to set up that RPS, we're looking at a couple different things. We are paying very careful attention to renewable integration and the reliability concerns there. That's all part of our modeling. So integration, reliability, but all sorts of reliability concerns for generation, for capacity, that's all part of our modeling. The amount of renewables, we're trying to strike a balance. And ambitious, it's fast, but it's, we think, an achievable rollout of renewables, getting them out as quickly as perhaps they could be out, or, it may not be the fastest, but it's a pace at which we think it plausible that given what we know about current technologies, that they could be rolled out. We're managing the integration. So there are different choices that could be made here in terms of the amount of renewables, and that would actually be an interesting area of further analysis to say how would these results change if we were to try to move a little faster, if we were trying to move a little slower with the renewables. And at this point, we haven't done that analysis, but it's something that we're interested in and learning more about as we go forward. In terms of the energy efficiency, for energy efficiency, we're looking at incremental efficiency savings of 2% a year by 2029. We chose that based on the most ambitious targets that are kind of already in effect today, with several states already that are meeting targets that are that amount or larger, and still a slightly larger group of states that have targets in the very near future that call on them to achieve 2% or more, heading up to about 2.5%. So we were looking at rollouts of different kinds of resources that were doable, seem achievable, but were still very ambitious. Okay. Pat, gonna do the next one? Okay, Pat.
Hi there. So we got a couple of questions inquiring about the costs that we're seeing in our scenarios for traditional generation, also for renewables and for energy efficiency. So in general, our costs for generation fuel costs come from EO 2015. So that's a citation that's commonly used by many in the energy planning sphere. Our renewables costs come from a number of a couple of studies. The citations for these can be found specifically in the report that accompanied our brief for this webinar. And the last piece about energy efficiency costs, we're basing our energy efficiency costs on a review of literature we released last fall in a report. Again, the citation for this can be found in this webinar's accompanying report. A piece of this question I'm saying about whether we included costs associated with government subsidies and tax credits for renewables and for EE programs. We are not including any of these costs or including them as savings. We're assuming that any government subsidies and tax credits are not included. For energy efficiency, we're assuming that 50% of costs are borne by participants and the other 50% are borne by the program administrators or utilities.
The average that we find in the literature today about who's paying what for energy efficiency programs is that there's quite a wide range from state to state of participants paying versus programs paying, but that on average it's about 50%. We have another question that's about the increase in demand over time and about electric vehicles using the grid. So asking about that relationship. In making the assumptions about electric vehicles, our focus here is not transportation sector, and we're not trying to push that out or to assume the most ambitious possible rollout for electric vehicles here. We're having some electric vehicles come onto the system. Look for the amount here. I don't have it in front of me. Sorry. It's in the report, and the rollout of electric vehicles is more than the reference case, but it is not a complete changeover to electric vehicles or anything like that. But it is bringing some of that load, that demand for electricity, onto the electric system, which does drive our total demand for electricity up over time. Of course, at the same time, we're seeing all these efficiency gains. So if you're, let me go back to the slide here. So if you look at these bars just going up to the yellow and you ignore the pink, then that's the actual amount of electric generation. The energy efficiency is generation that would have been made if you hadn't had those efficiency measures in place. So, let's see. I'm going to look at another question here. I think you have just answered this one, Pat, while I was looking at another one. Does your cost analysis include any costs associated with government subsidies, tax credits for renewable EE programs? Were you just talking about that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The next thing I'm seeing here is projected emissions and costs for the clean in the power plan compared to the reference scenario. Were you saying something, Pat, or?
Sorry, I actually cut out there. Do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah. So how do your projected emissions and costs with Clean Power Plan in 2030 compare to the reference scenario? And that's kind of the meat of the analysis here. Although we're not, our analysis doesn't come from the point of view of how can we comply with the Clean Power Plan. It instead is designing a low emissions, no regrets scenario and seeing if that's Clean Plan compliant. But because there are so many different possible ways that that you could comply with the Clean Power Plan, then there isn't just one thing that Clean Power Plan is. So we found with our Clean Energy Future, which does comply and over-comply with the Clean Power Plan, is that emissions are a lot lower and that costs were lower too. So that answers the person's question. They can send in another question to webinar at if it doesn't. Pat, got a couple lined up?
Sure. So I'm seeing one question here about level of renewables, these models in the Clean Energy Future, and whether these are consistent with what the EPA counts as renewables in the proposed Clean Power Plan. So the kinds of renewables that we're calling renewables in this presentation and in the report are the same kinds of renewables that EPA has identified in the Clean Power Plan. We have a specific breakout by technology in the accompanying report. I believe it's Appendix F. It's the very last couple of pages attached to the report. A second piece of this question asks about if you only model 30% renewables, would there still cost savings relative to the reference case? This is I don't know specifically. We didn't model that scenario, but what we were finding in a number of scenarios that we modeled here into the one that we've discussed is that with more and more renewables and energy efficiency being put on the system, we saw greater cost savings and bill savings for consumers. Why we decided to pursue this no regrets type of scenario. We're looking at a scenario in which very high levels of renewables and energy efficiency are being put in place.
Do you have another one after that, or I've got a couple lined up too?
Why don't you go ahead and I'll keep looking through here.
Okay. The next I'm seeing here is, did you run a 100% carbon-free generation scenario for 2025 or 2030? No, we didn't. There's so many different possible scenarios that could be run here and that would be very interesting. It's just that for this particular project, what we're doing is comparing the clean energy future to the reference case. And so those are the only runs that we've done within this project. We're happy to talk to people about doing other runs, but it's something that exists at this time. We have a question here, Pat, that is, what is the levelized cost of energy efficiency that's assumed, and what is assumed for wind and solar? I think that those details are in the report. Isn't that right, Pat?
I think I've already addressed this question, actually.
Okay.
If you go to the report in Appendix E, there's a section called Future Costs of Generating Resources, where we detail the costs that we use and the citation.
Okay. The next question is, what market scenarios are your transitions to renewables keyed to? I'm not sure I'm getting the question. Are you seeing that one, Pat?
Yeah. Is it possible for this person to send another email to webinar@Synapse and clarify a bit about market scenarios?
Yeah, we're not quite understanding the question. If you want to write in again, then we'll give it another try, okay? Next question. Is one takeaway message that if states want to lower utility bills, they should incorporate renewables and energy efficiency to a much greater extent than required by the Clean Power Plan? Or almost. I would say a great takeaway message is that is one way to lower bills. That's what we're modeling here. We're not saying it's the only way to lower bills, but we were looking for a technology mix going into the future that did lower bills, and this is the one that we hit upon and pushed out and turned into a sort of a whole scenario of the electric system that met reliability and so forth. So yes, I think you could use that as a takeaway message.
Answer one here about including the cost of expensive investments in energy efficiency and renewables. Including these costs would or not lower consumer bills. We're including the costs of energy efficiency and renewables in both scenarios. So in reference case, as well as in the clean energy future, we have energy efficiency and renewables. In the reference case, the bill of renewables we're putting in place is limited to so-called on-books. So this might be renewables that are affiliated with renewable portfolio standards for safety in existence today. So in both scenarios, we are including the full costs of implementing both renewables and energy efficiency.
Oops. Thanks. You can hear me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I've got another question here. Do you have more detail on the technology types used for energy efficiency in the report? How much is conservation versus efficiency in industrial processes? So that is not something that we have. That we are looking at efficiency pretty generically here in terms of how much savings can be achieved, and on average, what would the cost be of those savings? We're not looking at specific programs or the breakdown of specific programs here. I think an important work. It's just not, we're not at that level of resolution for efficiency in this model. On state energy cost savings by state graph, Do you have a table graph with state costs today? I have it for 2012. I think that's in Appendix F, right, Pat?
Yeah, that's in the back.
State. Have you compared the costs in a high investment, REE, to trade-only scenario with endogenous determination of new generation efficiency? No, we haven't run that one. So, for the project, we're just focused exclusively on comparing clean energy future to reference case. So there are a lot of other really interesting scenarios that we could do, and that's kind of one of the beauties of our. Am I going the right direction here? Wait 1 second. Of the Clean Power Plan Toolkit that we put together is that we have everything set up to be able to run interesting scenarios, like the one you mentioned, one earlier webinar participant mentioned, that those are all different scenarios that could be run using this model, and there are an infinite number of scenarios like that. So we're happy to talk to people about running interesting scenarios, but in terms of this work that we're presenting today, we're just comparing clean energy future to reference case. Let's see. Do you guys have more questions coming in? Let me take a look at this other list over here. I think that I hit all of these. Pat, more?
Yep, just a second, reading through a couple more here.
Okay. I think we had a clarification question about what you'd said, Pat, about including government subsidies and so forth. Can you just clarify that point or repeat it one more time? Are we including any government subsidies or credits?
So for renewables, we are assuming that there are no government subsidies in the future for wind or solar or any of the other renewable types that we're modeling here. And for energy efficiency, we're assuming that energy efficiency plans exist such that some amount, we're calling it 50% of the cost of energy efficiency are coming from program administrators, i.e. utilities. So these costs are provided by utilities for those people who are interested in participating in energy efficiency programs and are typically collected from layers via a fee on their current electric rate. That's the only. It's the only element that I suppose that you could classify as being a subsidy or a reallocation of costs that we've modeled. And this approach is the same approach that's commonly used in providing energy efficiency programs across the country today.
I've got one that, give us in here, Sarah's pulling up the question for me. Thanks. Question, how can small-scale nonprofit community organizing groups use this information in education and activism around climate change? I think that's a great question. There's probably lots of people that are participating in this conference call that have good and interesting answers to that. We're coming at the issue of climate change, of emissions, of Clean Power Plan compliance from a different point of view, which is a rigorous technical point of view, and that's kind of our contribution to the discussion, is to try to do this rigorous analysis. We're doing very detailed electric sector analysis with complex models, and to then get that information into the hands of folks that are going to be responsible for doing the compliance work in their states, and then also all the different advocacy groups and interest groups that are going to be dialogue about those compliance plans, we want to make the information available to everyone. In terms of how it then gets used, the one thing that I can say about that is that there already and will be public processes and public comment periods and dialogues that are specific to Clean Power Plan in every state. That's part of the way which states must comply is having a certain amount of public dialogue and comment about their plans. So those are processes that community groups and other advocacy groups can be involved in, and to be able to have their voice heard at those times. So we're always happy to talk to a group that wants to call us up and have a question or get some more specific information from us. You're welcome to contact one of us, and we can talk about more. Yeah, you had another question? Sorry, Pat has a question or answer.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So I'm seeing one more question here that says, hey, assumed cost increases for energy efficiency increases based on the increasing rate of development. With that we've assumed of energy efficiency, do energy efficiency costs increase with higher penetration levels? This is an interesting question. Commonly assumed that as more energy efficiency is put on the electric system, that the cost of implementing energy efficiency will increase as a result of the so-called low-hanging fruit already being plucked, and new energy efficiency programs and measures put in place are ones that require deeper investment. On the other end, there's another point of view that says that as energy efficiency programs increase in size, there are yet more efficiencies to be gained in terms of the size of the programs, having lower administrative costs per kilowatt hour, and a number of other efficiencies. What we found from our research is that there actually really isn't much evidence for its increase in costs as energy efficiency programs increase in size. There's a lot of evidence for energy efficiency decreasing, but there's no upswing, so to speak, that when we do get to a certain level of energy efficiency penetration, that energy efficiency costs start to increase their costs upwards. To be somewhat consistent with the EPA, we've assumed our energy efficiency costs do increase, and that's represented in that chart that Liz was showing earlier, and it is that Appendix D of the report. But we're not assuming any drastic increases in future costs of energy efficiency.
Thanks, Pat. We're reaching the end of our time here. I think that there's one last question that I'm going to take. I know we've gotten a few more. We're happy to answer questions offline. You can write to our individual emails, or you can write to webinar at Synapse-Energy. We'll be taking a look at both of those. Oops, sorry. I think I just popped myself out of here. We're happy to answer more questions, so please do write. The last question that we had, it's actually a question about providing some citations and other information. I think that's a good one to follow up, and if we do have resources, then we'd of course be happy to share them. But so if you have questions like that about doing some more specific resources about a particular question, then please write to us and we can answer you over email. I want to thank everybody for sticking with us here for an hour on this topic. And I know we're all looking forward to the release of the final rule. We'll get busy on understanding it and thinking about it, and for some of you actually compliance plans about it. So as soon as the final rule is out, as you've seen, we're going to be having a series giving all the information that we have about that and helping people to understand the impacts of the final rule. So we'll be very glad to have you join us for those webinars as well. Thanks, everybody, and do write to me or Pat or to the webinar email, and we can continue the dialogue.